What do you do when the most valuable player in the history of your sport starts looking over her shoulder at the exit sign? That's the question hanging over the Indiana Fever right now. And the more you dig into what's actually been happening behind closed doors in Indianapolis, the more uncomfortable the answer becomes. Because here's the thing. Caitlin Clark didn't just join the WNBA, she rebuilt it. She turned half-empty arenas into sold-out stadiums. She made women's basketball appointment television for millions of people who had never watched a single WNBA game in their lives. She generated a wave of cultural and economic energy that the league hadn't seen in its entire existence. And the franchise, lucky enough to have her, instead of doing everything in their power to protect that, to build around it, to celebrate it, reports, analyst commentary, and a growing mountain of public evidence suggest they've done the opposite. There are whispers coming out of Indiana that range from frustrating to genuinely shocking. There are questions about coaching philosophy, about locker room dynamics, about whether the people running this franchise actually understand what they have, or whether they're more concerned with protecting the way things have always been done. And layered on top of all of that, rumors have started circulating about a West Coast organization that's been watching this situation very closely and may be positioning itself to make a move that would completely reshape the WNBA landscape. We're going to break all of it down today, every layer, every angle. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why so many people believe the Indiana Fever are standing at the edge of a cliff they built themselves, and why Caitlin Clark's future might look very different from what any of us expected. But first, you need to understand the scale of what we're actually talking about, because this isn't a story about a player being unhappy. This is a story about one of the most extraordinary economic transformations in sports history, and what happens when the organization sitting at the center of it refuses to change. Let's put some numbers on the table, because the abstract idea of Caitlin Clark changed everything doesn't do justice to the actual, measurable, staggering reality of what happened when she entered professional basketball. In her rookie season, Clark shattered virtually every meaningful viewership record the WNBA had ever tracked. Games featuring the Indiana Fever were pulling television ratings that, in some cases, outperformed NBA playoff matchups on the same networks. ESPN, which had been quietly reducing its WNBA coverage, suddenly found itself scrambling to add broadcast slots because the demand was there in a way it simply hadn't been before. League-wide attendance jumped dramatically, and that wasn't just Indiana home games. Opposing arenas were selling out too, because fans wanted to see Clark play regardless of which city she was in. Jersey sales, sponsorship deals, streaming numbers, social media engagement, every single metric that sports leagues use to measure their commercial health moved upward, and the through line in almost every case was the same name. And here's the part that makes what allegedly happened inside the Fever organization so baffling. When you have an asset generating that kind of economic gravity, the instinct of any rational business operation is to double down. You build your systems around her. You recruit players who complement her strengths. You make your coaching decisions with her at the center of everything. You do not, under any reasonable interpretation of good management, start making moves that analysts and insiders interpret as quietly trying to build a team that functions without her. But that, according to a growing chorus of voices, analysts, commentators, former players, and people close to the situation, is exactly what appears to have been happening. And it starts with the coaching staff. Head coach Stephanie White is not a bad basketball mind. That needs to be said clearly, because this isn't a personal attack. She's a former player with legitimate credentials and a coaching background that earned her this job. But credentials and compatibility are two different things. And what's become increasingly clear over the past season, through game film, press conference moments, analyst breakdowns, and the kind of quiet commentary that comes from people who watch this team closely, is that Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark see the game of basketball through fundamentally different lenses. And when a head coach and the most important player on her roster can't get on the same page philosophically, somebody pays the price. In Indiana, All the evidence suggests it's been Clark. Multiple sports analysts and commentators have gone on record noting that the Fever's offensive system doesn't appear to be designed around maximizing Clark's abilities. Rather than leaning into her extraordinary court vision, her three-point range, her ability to function as a true point guard who makes everyone around her better, the team's tactical approach has frequently looked like it was built to contain her role rather than expand it. Late-game isolation patterns, rotation decisions that limit her time with her best supporting players, and a general offensive structure that doesn't always put her in positions to do what she does best. Now, coaches make tactical decisions for all kinds of reasons, and it would be unfair to assume the worst without acknowledging the complexity involved in managing a full roster. But the pattern has been consistent enough, and the commentary from enough credible voices, that it's impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Then came the moment that really crystallized the public frustration, the Alyssa Thomas situation. During a game that drew enormous attention, Clark was on the receiving end of contact from Thomas that many observers, including fans, analysts, and commentators watching in real time, felt should have generated a much stronger response from her coaching staff. White's handling of the situation in its immediate aftermath was widely criticized. She issued what appeared to be a brief, almost reluctant acknowledgement of Clark's experience, and then, in subsequent comments, the framing shifted in a way that struck many people as deeply uncomfortable. Rather than standing firmly in her star player's corner, White's public statements seemed to soften and redirect in ways that left Clark without the institutional backing you'd expect a franchise to provide for its most important asset. The clip circulated everywhere. The commentary was fierce, and the feeling that emerged from it, that Clark was operating inside an organization that wasn't fully prepared to go to bat for her when it mattered, stuck. One commentator put it plainly: they've spent 2 off-seasons building a team to play without Caitlin Clark, not around her, without her. Whether that's the literal truth or a sharp piece of analytical frustration is debatable. But what isn't debatable is that enough people inside and around the sport are saying versions of the same thing that the Fever front office can't simply dismiss it as noise. Here's where the organizational drama gets genuinely complicated, and where Indiana faces a decision that could define the franchise for the next decade. Kelsey Mitchell is a talented guard. She's been a cornerstone of the Fever roster and has a loyal following inside the organization. She's also heading toward free agency, with her contract situation creating a moment of forced decision-making that the Fever's front office cannot avoid or delay indefinitely. The question is simple, even if the answer is hard. Who does this team build around? Because the uncomfortable truth, and analysts have been saying this openly, is that you cannot fully commit to both directions at once. Mitchell's style, her role within the existing system, and the way the team has been constructed around her in recent seasons represents one vision of what the Indiana Fever can be. And Caitlin Clark represents something else entirely, a different philosophy, a different style of play, a different ceiling of what this franchise could achieve if the pieces were built correctly. Multiple credible voices have suggested that the Fever front office's off-season moves have quietly signaled which direction they lean, and that the direction isn't necessarily Clark. Roster construction decisions, the players brought in and the roles they've been given, the tactical systems that have been emphasized, all of it, when you zoom out and look at the pattern, paints a picture of an organization that may be more attached to its existing identity than it is to the historic opportunity sitting in the middle of its locker room. Now, to be fair, and we have to be fair, running a professional sports franchise involves managing egos, contracts, relationships, and competing interests in ways that aren't always visible from the outside. There may be context we don't have. There may be conversations happening privately that tell a different story. But what we can evaluate is the public record. And the public record, increasingly, suggests that the Fever are approaching a fork in the road where they'll be forced to show their hand. When Mitchell's contract comes up, when Clark's own future timeline comes into focus, the franchise won't be able to straddle both paths anymore. They'll have to choose. And if reports are accurate about what's been happening on the West Coast, the window for making the right choice may be closing faster than Indiana realizes. Let's be precise here, because this is where the story gets sensationalized very quickly, and it's important to separate what we know from what's being speculated.
Here's what is confirmed. The Los Angeles Sparks have new ownership. The Walter Group, the same ownership structure involved with the Los Angeles Lakers, has become significantly more involved with the Sparks organization this season. That's not a rumor. That's been reported by credible sports journalists, including ESPN's Ramona Shelburne, who described it as more of an organizational shift than any single specific move. New money, new energy, and a clear signal that the Sparks intend to compete seriously for talent and relevance in a league that's experiencing unprecedented growth. Here's what is speculative and should be treated as such. Rumors have circulated in sports commentary circles suggesting that the Sparks, under this new ownership structure, have identified Caitlin Clark as a transformative target. Some reports and commentators have floated figures in the range of $50 million in total package value, combining salary, endorsements, and long-term deal structures, as the kind of offer that could theoretically be constructed to make a West Coast move financially irresistible. Now, here's the reality check. The WNBA has a salary structure that creates strict limits on what any team can directly pay a player. A $50 million direct contract is not how the WNBA works right now. What is possible, and what savvy ownership groups with resources are exploring, is creative deal-making that layers endorsement partnerships, marketing arrangements, equity-style structures, and ownership-connected opportunities on top of a base salary to build something far more lucrative than the contract number alone. Whether the Sparks have actually put any specific offer on the table, formal or informal, has not been confirmed by credible reporting. What has been confirmed is that there's genuine organizational interest from new ownership in building something significant, that Clark's name has come up in that context in sports media circles, and that the personal connections are already there in ways that make this more than pure fantasy. Cameron Brink, the Sparks center, is a genuine friend of Clark's. That relationship is real and documented. Kate Martin, who has been part of Clark's basketball world for years, is another thread in this web. The Sparks have been making moves, in personnel, in organizational philosophy, in the signals they're sending to the league, that at minimum suggest they're positioning themselves as a destination for exactly the kind of generational talent that transforms franchises. Is Clark definitely leaving Indiana? No, that's not what the evidence says. Is there real smoke here, coming from enough different directions that it deserves serious attention? Absolutely. And Indiana would be making a catastrophic mistake to treat these rumors as background noise. The on-court stuff is visible. The tactical decisions, the rotation choices, the press conference moments, those play out in public and get dissected endlessly. What's harder to see, but arguably more important, is what the internal culture of the Indiana Fever actually feels like day to day. And the signals coming from inside that building, filtered through analyst commentary, insider reporting, and the kind of between-the-lines reading that experienced sports watchers develop over time, suggest an environment that hasn't always made its most important player feel valued. Think about what it means to accomplish what Clark accomplishes on a weekly basis, to break records, to drive ticket sales, to generate the kind of cultural conversation that spills far outside sports media into mainstream coverage, and to do all of that while feeling, according to reports and commentary, that the organization around you isn't fully celebrating it, isn't amplifying it, isn't building around it. Former players and analysts have noted that the Fever's institutional response to Clark's milestone moments has frequently been muted in ways that stand out. In a league desperately trying to grow, you'd expect the organization housing its biggest star to be relentlessly highlighting her achievements, creating content around her records, building the kind of organizational pride that reinforces to her that this is where she belongs. The degree to which that's happened or hasn't happened has drawn commentary. Then there's the bench dynamic, which has been discussed openly. Kate Martin's situation, the way bench rotations have been constructed, the roles that have and haven't been given to players who complement Clark's game. These aren't isolated decisions. They form a pattern, and the pattern tells a story about priorities. To be balanced, Stephanie White has spoken about wanting intensity, focus, execution, and next play mentality from her roster. Those are legitimate coaching demands. And there have been stretches of the season where the Fever have played well, where the pieces have fit, where the potential of this roster has been visible. This isn't a story about a team that's been a disaster from top to bottom.
But not a complete disaster is not the standard you apply to a franchise with Caitlin Clark on its roster. The standard is, are you doing everything possible to make this work? And a growing number of serious voices are saying the answer is no. One of the most remarkable things about this entire situation is the intensity of the public response. Fever fans and Clark fans more broadly are not passive observers watching this drama unfold from a distance. They are engaged, they are vocal, and they are increasingly directing their frustration at the franchise rather than at Clark herself. Social media has become a running referendum on Indiana's management decisions, with every rotation choice, every press conference answer, every perceived slight toward Clark generating waves of commentary that reach well beyond the usual sports fan circles. And this matters, not just emotionally, but economically. Because the sponsors paying to be associated with the Indiana Fever, the broadcast partners scheduling their games, the merchandise retailers stocking Clark jerseys, all of these commercial relationships exist because of the audience Clark has brought to this product. The moment that audience starts to feel that the franchise is working against rather than for the player they came to see, the economic logic of those commercial relationships starts to shift. Brands are extraordinarily sensitive to this kind of public sentiment. They don't want to be caught on the wrong side of a story where the hero, the person the fans are clearly rallying around, is being treated poorly by the institution they're sponsoring. The reputational math is simple. You don't want your logo associated with the villain in a story this many people are watching. And the story, right now, is that the Indiana Fever may be the villain in Caitlin Clark's narrative. That's not fair to everyone inside that organization. There are good people at the Fever working hard, but perception is reality in sports marketing, and the perception being built, one press conference, one rotation decision, one muted response to a milestone at a time, is not good for business. The front office would be wise to understand that the fan frustration isn't a PR problem to be managed, it's a market signal to be heeded. So where does this actually go? Because drama and tension is interesting, but what matters is the outcome. And right now, there are essentially 3 realistic paths forward for Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever, and each one has massive implications. This is the path the Fever should be pursuing aggressively. It means acknowledging, publicly and structurally, that the franchise needs to reorganize itself around Clark's strengths. It means making coaching decisions, roster decisions, and organizational culture decisions that put her at the center rather than the periphery of the plan. It means being willing to make uncomfortable changes, potentially including changes to the coaching staff, if those changes are what it takes to build a genuine partnership with the player who has transformed the franchise's commercial reality. It also means the front office needs to be more vocal, more celebratory, more willing to publicly defend their player when she's in situations that warrant it. The institutional silence around her milestones and the muted responses to moments where she deserved stronger backing, those things need to change, and they need to change visibly enough that Clark and her camp actually believe the change is real. If Indiana does this, Clark stays, the team potentially becomes a dynasty-level contender, and the franchise rides the wave of her career into an era of sustained relevance. It's the best outcome available, but it requires the organization to be honest with itself about what it's been doing wrong, and organizations don't always have that capacity. This is the quiet nightmare scenario. Indiana doesn't fundamentally change its approach, but Clark's contract situation and the realities of WNBA free agency mean she stays in Indiana longer than either party necessarily wants. The tension continues, the public frustration continues, the on-court underperformance relative to her ceiling continues. Games get won and lost, seasons pass, and the greatest women's basketball player of her generation spends her prime years in a system that doesn't fully utilize her. This path ends badly for everyone. Clark's legacy is shaped by years of underachievement in a system that wasn't built for her. Indiana's brand suffers from the ongoing narrative of mismanagement. The WNBA loses some of the momentum it's been building because its biggest star isn't in a context where she's consistently delivering the best version of what she can be. This is the scenario that Indiana should be most afraid of, and the one the Sparks rumors suggest could actually happen if the conditions are right.
Under this path, Clark's contract situation reaches a point where a move becomes possible. The right offer from the right organization comes together, and she makes the decision that her professional future lies somewhere other than Indiana. The Sparks, with their new ownership, their West Coast market, their emerging talent base, and the personal connections already in place, are the most discussed destination, but they wouldn't necessarily be the only option. What happens to Indiana if Clark leaves? The economic answer is brutal. The TV ratings, the attendance numbers, the sponsorship value, the media attention, all of it was built on her presence. Without her, the Fever go back to being a mid-market WNBA franchise with solid attendance and limited national footprint. The commercial infrastructure that's been built over the past season doesn't automatically stay in place when the person who built it walks out the door. And what happens to whatever organization lands her? Instant transformation, instant credibility, instant commercial relevance on a scale the WNBA has only seen in one place with one player during one specific window of time. The irony is that Indiana holds all the cards right now. They have her, they have the relationship, they have the home court advantage in this negotiation in every sense. And if the reports and commentary are accurate, they're playing their hand in the least effective way possible. Step back for a moment from the Fever-Clark drama specifically, because there's something larger happening here that deserves to be named. The WNBA has spent decades fighting for survival, fighting for respect, fighting for broadcast deals and sponsorships, and the basic institutional recognition that women's professional basketball deserves to exist and be taken seriously. Players from past generations sacrificed enormous amounts, took overseas contracts in the off-season, played for salaries that couldn't sustain a middle-class lifestyle, competed in buildings that were sometimes a third full because they believed in the future of the league. Then Caitlin Clark arrived, and suddenly the future arrived ahead of schedule. The growth that happened over the past couple of seasons wasn't gradual or incremental. It was a step change, a before and after. And it happened because one player with an extraordinary combination of skill, personality, and timing connected with a mainstream audience that the WNBA had been reaching toward for years. The question the league now faces, and it's a question every franchise, every front office, every decision-maker in women's basketball needs to sit with, is whether the institutions of the sport are equipped to handle and sustain this moment. Whether the organizational cultures, the coaching philosophies, the management structures that evolved over decades of operating in survival mode are capable of shifting into something appropriate for the era of genuine mainstream commercial success. Because what's allegedly happening in Indiana isn't unique to Indiana. It's a symptom of a deeper institutional question. What does it look like when a sport's structures are built for one era, but the sport itself has suddenly entered another? What happens when the organizational habits and hierarchies of the WNBA's lean years meet the commercial reality of what women's basketball has become? The answer, if the Fever situation is any guide, can look like friction, like misalignment, like an institution struggling to adapt to new set of demands when it hasn't fully accepted that the demands have changed. The players coming up behind Clark are watching. The next generation of talent considering the WNBA as a destination is paying attention to how this plays out. If the story of the 2020s is that the WNBA exploded in popularity but couldn't figure out how to structure itself to keep its greatest assets feeling valued and protected, that's a story with real consequences for the league's long-term trajectory. But if the story is that franchise management adapted, that the league evolved its support structures, that the organizations entrusted with generational talent actually rose to the occasion, that's a foundation for something genuinely historic. Indiana gets to decide which story it's part of. That decision is being made right now. Here's where we land. Caitlin Clark is the most important thing to happen to women's professional basketball in a generation, possibly ever. The numbers support that, the cultural impact supports that, the commercial reality of what her presence has done to every metric the WNBA cares about supports that. The Indiana Fever have been, by accident of the draft, the franchise entrusted with that asset. And by growing accounts, from analysts, from commentators, from insiders, from the visible public record of coaching decisions and institutional responses, they have not fully honored that trust. The Stephanie White philosophical clash is real. The Kelsey Mitchell contract situation is a real fork in the road. The fan frustration is real. The LA Sparks rumors, while still speculation, are based on real organizational changes and real personal connections that make them more than tabloid fantasy. And the window for Indiana to get this right is not infinite.
There will come a moment, and it may be closer than the front office realizes, where the accumulation of decisions made, the pattern of choices over the past couple of seasons, reaches a tipping point that's very difficult to reverse, where Clark and the people around her look at the situation clearly and decide that the potential of staying is outweighed by the cost. Every week that passes without meaningful change is a week that makes that calculation a little more likely to tip the wrong way for Indiana. The Fever have one of the greatest players in sports history. She wants to win. She wants to be surrounded by a system that maximizes her. She wants, like any competitor, to be in an environment that sees her clearly and builds around what she actually is. Whether Indiana can become that environment, whether the organizational culture, the coaching philosophy, the front office mindset can shift in the ways that would be required, is the most important question in women's basketball right now. Because if they can, what's possible in Indianapolis is extraordinary. And if they can't, the West Coast is waiting. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Caitlin Clark stays in Indiana, or is the clock already running out? Let us know where you stand. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because this story is nowhere near over, and you don't want to miss what comes next.